Imagine waking up one morning to find your mind a cavernous silence, a vast desert where once your emotions roamed like wild rivers, rivers now dammed, redirected, or outright erased. You feel something is missing, though you cannot say what. A strange numbness clings to your bones, an emptiness masked as strength. You tell yourself, "I am fine. I have conquered my feelings." Yet beneath this calm facade, a storm is gathering, a tempest built not from fury but from neglect, from the very act of ignoring the tides that once shaped your inner world. How is it possible that ignoring something so intrinsic as emotion could bring about ruin? Isn't emotional restraint a sign of mastery over oneself? After all, the world praises those who appear unshaken, who meet the chaos of life with a calm, inscrutable gaze. But what if this very mastery is a mirage, a seductive delusion hiding a deeper fracture? What if the seeming strength in ignoring your emotions is, paradoxically, the prelude to your undoing? This is the unsettling paradox that Nietzsche confronts, an existential riddle that forces you to question the very foundations of your self-control. He teaches us that emotions are not mere distractions or weaknesses to be suppressed. They are the vital forces that animate your will, the primal energies that fuel your becoming. To sideline them is not to grow stronger but to starve the roots of your being, to cut off the flow of life itself. Is it possible, then, that ignoring your emotions is less an act of discipline and more a subtle form of self-destruction? Picture yourself as a garden, a carefully cultivated space where your ideals, thoughts, and ambitions grow. Within this garden, emotions are the earth, water, and sunlight, unseen but essential. Without them, the soil turns barren, the flowers wilt, the trees die silently from within. You might still prune your branches and trim your hedges, creating an ordered landscape. Yet the vital essence beneath is fading, the life force that makes your garden more than just empty order. Are you willing to live as this hollow garden, neat and controlled but devoid of life's pulse? You might protest, emotions cloud judgment. They are irrational, dangerous, disruptive. But what if the very act of rejecting emotions is a more insidious irrationality? What if the intellect and reason you hold so dear become twisted and brittle without the emotional core to anchor them? When you reject the raw, messy feelings, do you not force your mind into an unnatural state, a brittle logic unable to adapt, unable to grow? Nietzsche's philosophy beckons you to confront this. Tension, reason devoid of feeling, is like a blade without a handle, sharp but useless. Consider the figure of the Übermensch, Nietzsche's aspirational ideal, not a being who crushes or ignores emotion, but one who has transcended the petty constraints of shallow feeling through profound engagement with the full depth of life's passions. Ignoring emotion is not transcendence, it is evasion. It is running away from the storm inside, hoping that by building walls you can escape the flood. Yet the waters rise regardless. What happens when the dam finally breaks? Think of the human psyche as a grand symphony where every note, every emotion matters. Suppressing a single instrument might seem harmless in the moment, but as silences accumulate, the music falters, the harmony collapses. Over time, ignored emotions manifest not as absence but as violent dissonance, unexpected outbursts, deep depressions, unexplained anxieties. The self that once sought control finds itself unraveling from within. Are these not the symptoms of a slow self-destruction, born from the refusal to listen to the very forces that breathe life into us? What does it mean, then, to truly live? Is it the mechanical rhythm of a heart beating in denial, or the wild, unpredictable dance of feelings embraced? Nietzsche forces you to wrestle with this. What is the cost of emotional amnesia? How much self-erasure are you willing to endure to maintain the illusion of control? Where do you draw the line between healthy detachment and dangerous repression? And here lies the most urgent question. If ignoring your emotions is self-destructive, why does society so often praise emotional suppression? Why do we wear mask after mask, portraying stoicism as strength equating vulnerability with weakness. Is this collective denial a necessary survival tactic, or a cultural poison that deepens the fractures within us? Nietzsche's insights whisper that these are not easy questions, but necessary ones, if you wish to avoid the slow decay of your being. You stand now on the edge of this abyss, peering down into the shadows of your own inner world. The path behind you is paved with habits of suppression, with lessons that told you to keep calm, be strong, don't cry. The path ahead is uncertain but demands courage. The courage to face the storm within, to feel what you have long denied. Can you summon the will to step forward into this confrontation, to embrace the turbulent, chaotic depths of your own emotions? This confrontation is not a surrender but a necessary reckoning, a fierce awakening to the truth that ignoring your emotions is not the absence of weakness, but the gravesite of your vitality. Nietzsche's philosophy offers no safety net, no easy comfort. It asks you to become radically honest with yourself, to endure the pain that comes with feeling fully alive. Will you turn away, clinging to the brittle illusion of control, or will you dare to dive into the tumultuous sea of your own emotional being? This is where the journey begins, one that will unravel the layers of neglect and denial, revealing the true stakes of emotional suppression. How does ignoring your feelings lead you not to strength, but to self-destruction? And more importantly, how can you reclaim the vital energies within to forge a life of authentic power and meaning? The answers lie not in comfort or avoidance, but in the depths of your own experience, where Nietzsche's piercing insights await to guide you beyond the paradox. The next step beckons you to look closer at the anatomy of emotional repression and its corrosive impact on your soul. Would you dare to follow? Imagine, then, the origin of this silent war you wage against your own feelings, not a battle born of whimsy, but of centuries-old injunctions rooted deep in the human psyche and culture. Why do you persist in the paralysis of emotional denial as if your survival depended on it? The answer is less about your personal failure and more about the invisible architecture of the human mind, shaped by forces both psychological and philosophical, societal and existential. Consider the insights of Carl Jung, who peered relentlessly into the abyss of the unconscious. He warned that the parts of your soul you refuse to face, the shadow, the concealed depths of pain, rage, desire, do not disappear simply because you repress them. Instead, they gather power in the dark, festering and distorting your waking life. To ignore emotions is not a neutral act. It is a contract signed with your own fragmentation. By denying these parts of yourself, you surrender to an inner schism. What if the very act of emotional suppression is the seedbed of psychic illness, the source of neurosis? Jung's shadow is not merely a metaphor but a living, breathing pressure cooker beneath your skin, waiting for release. But this shadow was not born in a vacuum. Nietzsche saw this denial as a symptom of a cultural malaise, a symptom of what he called ressentiment. The morality enforced by society, cloaked in virtue and duty, demands you mask your primal emotions, anger, desire, grief, in the name of order and civility. This forced negation creates an inner contradiction. The will to power, your drive toward creativity, vitality, and authenticity, is repressed under the weight of social expectation and self-imposed restraint. Nietzsche's last man, content in his shallow comfort and emotional exile, embodies the death of the spirit. You can almost hear the echo of this last man inside your own mind, whispering that to feel deeply is dangerous, that surrender to passion is self-destruction. Yet this is not merely a philosophical abstraction. Arthur Schopenhauer, Nietzsche's philosophical predecessor in despair, saw the human will as a blind, ceaseless force, rooted in suffering and desire. Emotions in their raw form are the language of that will. To deny your emotions, therefore, is to choke the very engine of your existence. Schopenhauer explains, not without cruelty, that happiness is an illusion, a brief pause between pains, and that the denial of emotional reality only prolongs suffering through illusion. What is more terrifying than emotional destruction, then, is the quiet, slow unraveling of your will, your essence, within a cage of numbness. In the modern era, voices like Aldous Huxley and Jean-Paul Sartre have added layers to this portrait of emotional repression as existential tragedy. Huxley imagined a society anesthetized by superficial pleasures, where true feeling was sacrificed on the altar of distraction and control. Sartre's stark existentialism challenged you to confront the abyss of freedom, and with it, the anguish of owning your emotions, your choices, your existence. To ignore what you feel is to run from freedom itself, and freedom, Sartre insists, is inseparable from responsibility for the self. By muting your emotions, you abdicate responsibility and, in essence, your own becoming. Viktor Frankl, who survived the horrors of the concentration camps, offers a stark perspective on the stakes involved. He teaches that meaning arises precisely through the confrontation with suffering, through the active engagement with painful emotions rather than their avoidance. Frankl's existential psychology suggests that emotional denial is a refusal to participate in the fundamental human quest for meaning. To suppress your emotions is to sever the thread that links your suffering to your potential for growth. This severing is not mere discomfort, it is a spiritual death sentence. This hidden force, the compounding pressure to silence, suffocate, and deny your emotions, shapes every facet of human behavior and identity. It twists your choices, warps your relationships, and erodes your capacity for joy and creativity. The paradox is cruel. The very survival mechanism you adopt to avoid emotional pain becomes the architect of deeper, more insidious destruction. It is an emotional cancer, invisible until it has spread beyond hope, a slow poisoning of your soul. You may ask, then, why this force often remains imperceptible, so natural that it masquerades as strength or normalcy. The answer lies partly in the collective myths and narratives that uphold stoicism as the hallmark of maturity and weakness as a moral failing. From childhood, the message drills itself into your nervous system. Emotional expression is dangerous, a threat to stability, a form of surrender to chaos. Yet, Nietzsche confronts us with the brutal truth that the denial of emotional chaos does not foil it, but only delays its reckoning. The longer you resist the storm, the more devastating its eventual eruption. And what of your identity? It is no accident that when emotions are buried, the self itself feels fragmented, hollowed out. Nietzsche's concept of the Übermensch is not a call to become a cold, detached icon of will, but to integrate the fullness of life, the beauty and the pain, the exaltation and the despair. To ignore your emotions is to forfeit this integration, to live as a shadow of yourself, a pale ghost wandering the ruins of authenticity. This is why repression does not lead to strength, but to self-estrangement, a deep loneliness that no external achievement or distraction can fill. You stand now at the edge of understanding that emotional denial is not a mere psychological hiccup or social peccadillo. It is a profound existential crisis that distorts the architecture of your being. It is the silent thief that steals your vitality, your courage, your capacity to live fully. The consequences ripple far beyond your inner life, affecting the way you love, create, resist, and endure. But this realization holds both threat and promise. The emotional destruction wrought by denial is not irreversible. Nietzsche's philosophy is both a warning and a call to arms. To survive the death-dealing forces within, you must first acknowledge their presence. To face your emotions is not to fall victim to them, but to reclaim the terrain of your soul. Yet the terrain is treacherous, the battleground arduous. The next step is to uncover how this repression concretely fractures your life, how it manifests not just in mind but in body, behavior, and relationships, before you can dare to dismantle these walls and brush aside the dust covering your true self. Will you peer deeper into the consequences of this silent war? Will you trace the hidden threads by which emotional suppression ensnares you in cycles of self-destruction? The path forward demands it, and the truth awaits, raw, unyielding, and necessary. How often do you catch yourself retreating from the tremors beneath your skin, pushing away that subtle quiver of unrest, that flicker of sorrow or rage? It is a quiet withdrawal, a whisper of denial barely noticed amid the roar of daily life. Yet this seemingly innocent act, ignoring your emotions, is not just personal evasion. It is a shadow that creeps into the corners of your mind, rewiring your very perception of reality. It is the slow erosion of your internal compass, and then, inevitably, the fracturing of the world you inhabit. You might imagine emotions as flimsy, irrational intrusions, signs of weakness or obstacles to clear thinking. Society trains you to equate logic with strength, discipline with control, and emotions with chaotic surrender. From childhood, you learn to master the art of silencing the feelings that do not fit neatly into neat, socially acceptable boxes. Anger becomes dangerous, sadness a failure, fear cowardice. This conditioning is not just a personal narrative, it is a cultural edict, embedded into the architecture of your collective existence. The effect is insidious because it convinces you that the very act of acknowledging your emotions is a risk, a potential loss of control that must be avoided at all costs. But what if this avoidance is not just a psychological slip, but a neurological trap? Recent advances in cognitive neuroscience reveal the intimate dance between emotion and cognition, exposing the false dichotomy you have been taught to accept. The brain's emotional centers, the amygdala, the insula, are not mere turmoil factories but fundamental organs of survival, decision-making, and self-knowledge. They shape the way your brain processes information, filters reality, and crafts your identity. Suppression of emotional input, then, is not simply muting a noisy signal. It is like severing the flow of vital data that informs your every choice, every judgment. Imagine a radar system that fails to detect storms, a ship navigating blind through turbulent waters. This is the silent consequence of emotional denial. Your mind becomes brittle, less adaptive, more prone to biases and errors. The prefrontal cortex, your seat of rational thought and planning, relies on the nuanced guidance emotions provide to weigh options and predict outcomes. When that channel is blocked, decision-making deteriorates. You fall prey to cognitive distortions, confirmation bias, where you seek only what supports your numb status quo, negativity bias, where suppressed feelings fester and explode unpredictably, and habituation, where you grow numb not just to pain but to joy, hope, and connection. The trap tightens further when you consider cultural conditioning. In many societies, emotional stoicism is heralded as a virtue, linked to strength, honor, and maturity. Nietzsche, who so profoundly critiqued the masks of civility, would argue that this valorization of repression creates a collective self-betrayal. Societies that demand emotional invisibility craft individuals fragmented and alienated, strangers to their own depths. The social fabric thins as empathy erodes. Relationships become transactional, superficial, or hostile. You may not see the slow poisoning of your connections, but it is happening beneath the surface, as surely as rust consumes metal left in damp air. What you experience as isolation, anxiety, or a haunting emptiness is often the outward echo of this internal fracture. You stand surrounded by others, yet feel more alone than ever because the unspoken rule mandates you hide your truth, the uncomfortable, the ugly, the vulnerable, a prohibitive silence that substitutes real intimacy for illusion. In this world, even love can become a performance, desire a duty, and friendship a fragile alliance built on omission. The cost of emotional denial is not just your personal suffering, but a collective impoverishment of the human spirit. Neurology, psychology, and sociology converge on a critical insight. Ignoring your emotions is a profound form of self-destructive neglect that extends outward. You are not simply damaging the delicate machinery of your mind. You are reshaping the very landscape of your life, fracturing your relationships, and stunting the evolution of your culture. The consequences ripple through your nervous system, increasing stress hormones that erode health, dampening neuroplasticity that stifles growth, and skewing neurotransmitter balances that govern mood and motivation. The body remembers what the mind refuses to acknowledge, and it retaliates in countless ways: fatigue, illness, compulsions, and despair. Can you feel the weight of this truth pressing down? This is not a problem waiting to be solved tomorrow. It is a daily poison, a slow-burning fuse igniting chaos not only within but all around you. The more you deny your emotional reality, the more you tighten the chains of your own captivity. The mechanisms are subtle, almost invisible, but their power is relentless and unforgiving. It is the silent war, fought beneath awareness, that shapes how you view your world and yourself. Yet there lies an urgent question dangling like a shadow over all this. If the denial of your emotions scripts such devastation, then how do you break this cycle? How do you emerge from the fog to see yourself and others with brutal clarity? Before you can answer, you must first confront the full extent of the damage this denial inflicts, not just as a theory but as the raw material of your daily existence. The next revelation awaits, promising not comfort but confrontation, not escape but an awakening. Can you feel it? The tension coiling tighter, the horizon darkening with the promise of truth. To ignore your emotions is to unzip the seams of your life's tapestry, thread by delicate thread. The question is no longer whether you will be consumed, but how completely. The trap you inhabit is invisible, but it is real, and only by stepping into its light can you begin to dismantle its hold. What if everything you believed about strength, control, and wisdom was inverted? What if the very thing you have been taught to suppress, to master, and to rationalize away, that torrent inside you called emotion, is not a weakness but the seedbed of your liberation? Imagine for a moment a world where ignoring your emotions is not an act of bravery or maturity, but the most profound form of self-betrayal. The quiet and unbearable self-destruction you have endured is not some cosmic accident, but the necessary consequence of a betrayal you carried out against your own soul. Friedrich Nietzsche knew this truth with unsettling clarity. He spoke of the Dionysian force, that primal wellspring of passion and chaos within us, as the essence of life itself, not a shadow to be banished but the fire to be harnessed. The Apollonian ideal of order and reason, long prized by Western thought, had suffocated the human spirit under a veneer of cold logic, rendering us blind to the full spectrum of our existence. To deny your emotions is to deny the Dionysian within you, and in doing so, you condemn yourself to a pale simulacrum of life, a ghost living among the ruins of your own vitality. Now consider this. The solution is not to discipline your emotions into submission, but to embrace them with ferocity and reverence. This is not an invitation to chaos or surrender, but a call to radical integration, a new kind of mastery that Nietzsche would recognize not as control, but as a dance with the wild, unpredictable pulse of your own being. He challenges the notion of stability through repression and asks instead for the creation of the Übermensch, a self-overcoming individual who transforms pain, passion, and despair into a source of unprecedented power. To break free, you must shift your gaze. Instead of viewing emotions as enemies to be defeated, see them as messengers, as sacred guides pointing to your most profound truths. Instead of fearing the unbearable intensity of feeling, step toward it with curiosity. The irony is staggering. The very pain you have sought to avoid is the gateway to your rebirth. This might feel like stepping off a cliff blindfolded, but history is littered with the wreckage of those who stayed on safe ground and were consumed by slow decay. Take Nietzsche himself, whose life was a crucible of torment and revelation. His philosophical breakthroughs emerged not despite his suffering, but through it, through relentless engagement with his pain, through the refusal to numb or escape. He did not preach detachment in the Stoic sense. Rather, he embraced the chaotic depths of his inner world and found there a spring of creative power that reshaped not only his life, but the very fabric of philosophical thought. Or consider the alchemists of old, who saw their transformative work as a metaphor for the soul's journey, an ordeal where base metals, analogous to base emotions, must be confronted, dissolved, and recombined to yield gold. This symbolism is not quaint but brutally relevant. To transmute your emotional darkness into strength, you must first face it with unflinching eyes and hands willing to endure the fire. What does this reclamation look like in practice? It demands a brutal honesty, an excavation into the buried places of your psyche where shame, grief, rage, and longing have been exiled. It requires you to dismantle the protective myths you've built, that emotions make you weak, that vulnerability invites destruction, that silence is safety. Each of these is a fortress built on quicksand. You must tear it down piece by piece, knowing that the ruins will become fertile ground for growth. This is not a path for the faint-hearted, but the alternative is far more harrowing, the slow erosion of your spirit until you are unrecognizable to yourself. Instead, imagine reclaiming sovereignty over your inner world by becoming fluent in the language of your feelings. Learn to listen to their cadence, their fierce wisdom, their riddles. When despair rises like a storm, acknowledge its message rather than suppressing it. When anger burns, do not let it consume you blindly but channel it into purposeful action. When joy and love whisper, do not shy away, but let them flood your being, reaffirming the sacredness of life. This transformation also rewires your relationship with control. Control is not about clasping tightly and shutting out the tempest within. It is the art of steering your ship through the storm, not avoiding the storm itself. You reclaim power not through denial but through synthesis, melding intellect and feeling, reason and passion, the known and the unknown into a whole, vibrant self. History's great revolutionaries of the psyche, from Nietzsche to Rilke, from Jung to modern-day psychotherapists, have all echoed this imperative. The self that triumphs is the one that embraces the full spectrum of its being, that refuses to fragment itself into neat categories of rational and irrational. True freedom lies in integration, not exclusion. Feel the magnitude of this revelation pulsing beneath your ribs. You are not a passive victim to the chaos inside you, but the potential alchemist of your own fate. The tempest you feared is the forge that will shape your soul's indomitable armor. This power has always been yours, buried beneath layers of fear and social conditioning, waiting not politely but insistently to be reclaimed. And so the question is no longer how to silence your emotions, but how to ignite them into a force of creation that reshapes your world. The old myths of mastery crumble under this new light. Mastery is not about suppression but dialogue, not about conquest but communion. You stand at the precipice, and behind you, the hollow promise of denial. Ahead, the wild, uncertain path of reclamation. Are you ready to step into that fire? Because the moment you do, you will discover something so radical it will overturn everything you thought you knew about strength and survival. You will find that the most profound power comes not from shutting down your emotions, but from unleashing their full, unmitigated force, wielded not as a weapon against yourself, but as a torch lighting the way forward. This is not just a mindset shift, it is a revolution of being. It is not comfort you will find here, but a fierce, illuminating truth, that to live fully you must embrace the chaos inside you. To ignore your emotions is to accept slow self-destruction. To embrace them is to become your own creator, your own liberator, your own Übermensch. Imagine standing in front of a mirror, not the polished kind that flatters, but one cracked and smudged with the fingerprints of your past denials. The reflection stares back with eyes that have seen too much and yet, paradoxically, too little. Each jagged fragment shows an emotion you refused to face, a truth you whispered away like it was a lie. But what if this mirror, this fractured image of yourself, is not a curse but a revelation? What if the self you think you are, disciplined, restrained, reasonable, is only a ghost, a shadow cast by your refusal to engage with the tempest beneath your skin? Friedrich Nietzsche once spoke of the profound danger not just of ignoring our emotions, but of severing ourselves from the very forces that animate our being. To deny emotion is not peace. It is a kind of slow violence against the soul. It's as if you are watering a garden with salt, a surface calm that slowly poisons the roots of your existence. The emotions you shun don't die quietly. They ferment, rot, and mutate into silent diseases. Anger that becomes rage unrecognized, sorrow transformed into numbness, joy compressed into desperate, hollow pursuits of distraction. This is the slow machinery of self-destruction. But there is a deeper, more unsettling truth lurking here. What if the very chaos you fear, the wildness of your emotional life, is what Nietzsche called the will to power? Not power over others, but power over yourself. The ability to become who you truly are beneath the layers of social conditioning, repression, and fear. The will to power is the energy that drives creation, destruction, and renewal all at once. It is the pulse of life itself. To ignore your emotions is to cut the power source of your own becoming. Instead of moving forward, you are merely existing in a liminal trap, alive yet dead to possibility. Pause and consider the paradox. Emotions are often portrayed as irrational, dangerous, even embarrassing things to be controlled or hidden. But from Nietzsche's perspective, to control is not to kill, but to harness, to transform base energy into something sublime. The tragedy is that society teaches you to bury your emotions deeply, labeling them as flaws or weaknesses, while secretly depending on you to be nothing more than a passive participant in a world that cares only for order and conformity. When you silence the fire inside you, you become complicit in your own erasure. But what would happen if you stopped running? What if you leaned into the chaos, not as a victim but as a warrior? Imagine your emotions not as wild beasts to be tamed or ignored, but as messengers from your deeper self, bearing the raw material of your future. Every pang of jealousy, every surge of joy, every ache of grief, these are fragments of your authentic self screaming to be heard, to be integrated. Nietzsche's Übermensch is not an idealized, stoic figure detached from feeling, but a being who has transmuted their emotional turmoil into a creative force, so potent it reshapes reality itself. Herein lies the deepest revelation. The suffering, confusion, and inner conflict you have endured are not signs of failure but markers on the path toward transcendence. The self you must destroy is not your whole being but the false self built on denial, the complacent mask of reason without passion, order without chaos, form without substance. When you destroy this illusion, you do not lose yourself. You find yourself in a form more vivid, more raw, and more alive than you ever imagined possible. This vision redefines reality itself. Life is not a problem to be solved, but a trial by fire through which your spirit is continually forged. Emotions are not obstacles to stability, but the very materials of transformation. Ignoring them is the slow death of potential. Embracing them is the alchemy of becoming. You are not a victim of your feelings, but their master craftsman, called to wield the wild energy within you as a sculptor wields the chisel, breaking down false surfaces to reveal the living, breathing statue beneath. And so, when you next feel the tremor of anxiety, the sting of loss, or the blaze of desire, do not recoil. Do not seek to extinguish the flame or to smother it with reasoned arguments. Instead, look closer. Listen intently. These feelings are not your enemies but your allies. Your task is to translate their language into action, insight, and growth. This is the true courage. The courage to face the chaotic orchestra within and conduct its dissonant notes into a symphony uniquely your own. As you stand now, looking into the cracked mirror, understand that the fractured image before you is not a sign of brokenness but a mosaic of becoming. Each piece, each emotion long denied, is a shard of possibility waiting to be reclaimed. To ignore this is to accept a slow unraveling, a fading into the gray shadows of existence. To embrace it is to step fully into your becoming, to write your own tragic, beautiful, wild story across the canvas of time. Nietzsche's ultimate charge is not a call to stoicism, not an invitation to numbness, but a summons to fierce engagement, a dance with your darkest and brightest forces alike. It is an invitation to become a creator of meaning in a world that offers none automatically. You are the artist of your own soul's destruction and rebirth, the alchemist of your own fate. So ask yourself, will you turn away from the storm inside you, retreating into the hollow sanctuary of denial? Or will you dare the fire, let your emotions blaze unrestrained, and forge from the chaos a new world, one where you are not merely surviving but radically, magnificently alive? The choice is terrifying, intoxicating, and utterly yours. And now, as silence falls around this moment, listen carefully. Beneath your ribs, beneath the noise of thought and the hardened armor of control, a pulse beats steady and unyielding. It is your life calling. Will you answer?